Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Arcane Designs Automaton, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly, maybe not. But we have two different versions here. We have a very standard version, and then we have the Blade Bench exclusive Dark Mode edition, which is really cool. Both are available. Actually, there's a ton of different configurations available on the Arcane Design website. You'll have to go to Blade Bench to get this one, but I'll link them all down in the description. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's up to you. Thanks so much to Arcane Design and Blade Bench for supplying these for review. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. Before we get started here, I'll bring this guy back. They go back and forth, Arcane Design, with OEMs. So they've been using Bestech here for a lot of stuff, but I think occasionally, and in the beginning, they used Riot. This is a Riot-made knife. It also is utilizing S90V, which I think we can see somewhere. Where is it printed? I know that these are S90V, and I'm not sure if it's actually printed on it. There it is. It's right there. S90V. Furthermore, typically the range that we see, the HRC range for S90V, is 59 to 61, which is actually very good for S90V. These are 61 to 62, which is going to dramatically increase the potential edge retention. But, you know, for those of you who really like a high HRC on some of these super steels, I thought that you would be pleased to know that, especially in combination with this being a Riot knife. It's an expensive knife, but those were two elements that I thought you might consider if you're going to go right to the website and look at the price tag, right? Two pretty big contributing factors there, the blade steel, the HRC, and of course the Riot made build quality, which is very apparent here. But anyways, let's go ahead and start off with some specs here. The overall length of this guy is coming in at just shy. It's about 7.85 inches overall. Blade length is coming in at 3.5. Cutting edge at about 3.4. Yeah, about 3.4. Really good ratios. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons. Any custom skills you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. Up against the 8010 and the 8020.5. It's kind of in between, maybe not nearly as robust as the 8010. Maybe it's closer to the size of the 8020.5, right? But I guess lengthwise, maybe somewhere in between. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Longer than the Para 3, shorter than the PM2, but with substantially more cutting edge than both. So, you know, if you're one of those people who really prefers the, a very similar blade to handle ratio, this is probably going to be a lot more aesthetically appealing to you. And then finally, up against the Benchmade Group Tillion, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. So how's the action on this knife? This is very smooth, very, very smooth. It's right out of the box, it was maybe slightly tighter. I'm trying to think of which one. This is the one that I've carried more. Arcane Design sent me this one and said, would you showcase this one in the review? And you know, I switched them out and carried this one a little bit, but this one I carried a lot more just because I love this dark mode configuration. Is just cool. Like this color of Anno with black, it looks like it's glowing. It makes me think of the Night Vision Sumo watch that I just purchased from Seiko. I mean, it's very, very similar to that color setup, and I just really like it. But the action on this one is very, very close to fall shut, and it broke in very, very quickly. But this is high quality. This is very precision, obviously very precision machining, and I can imagine it'll only get better. This utilizes like a thumb. It's not really a thumb stud. It's kind of a thumb stud, but it's angled slightly. And then this is also knurled right here. So it is actually really easy to get a hold of. I find that, you know, when I'm flicking it out this way, I'm not really on top of it like you can be, and it works, but I kind of get underneath it. Either way, it has a bunch, like if you're more this way or up naturally, it's just going to deploy. The reverse flick is arguably even easier, and these two are essentially identical. Like the detent strength is exactly what you would want it to be for this type of system. So some people don't like these, or they prefer a flipper or whatever. It definitely comes down to preference, but the system that they chose here works very, very well. It grabs the thumb. It doesn't require any extra mental or physical effort. It's pretty natural. It doesn't take an incredible amount of force to deploy. And because this is a nested, well, it's actually a frame lock. And we'll get further into that here in a second. But because there is a sort of scale over the top of this, it means that you don't have to search for exactly the right place to put your fingers on this side before you deploy it, which is really cool. The action is very, very good. It runs on bearings, but it's really, really nice. Let's go ahead and do carry profile thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. And it's not really super thick. I mean, these little pieces stick up a little bit, but the frame itself is really not all that thick. It's not all that different from something like a Para 3. Length and height. It also, by the way, is contoured subtly. This top area right here is not flat. It is subtly contoured, which is something that I like to point out when I can. Length and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. This is a pretty easy object to carry. It's a good amount of knife. It's not like a huge knife, but it's a good amount of knife to the point where I would not call it a small or even medium-sized knife. Very close to full size. What I consider full size, about 8 inches in length. So you guys always get on me when I say stuff like that. I'm talking about knives, okay? That's what I'm talking about here. Maybe it's my own intrusive thoughts. But yeah, very easy to carry. Not an issue for me. It might be slightly large for some people. Depends on what you're carrying. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say about that. And I'm constantly worrying that I'm going to accidentally say something that goes right along with what everybody is finding humorous about what I'm saying right now. Anyways, let's weigh it. So what are we looking at for materials? We're looking at titanium, more titanium. We're looking at S90V, and then actually this internal, the frame lock here is actually steel, and I'm realizing my magnet is, there it is right there. This is all steel, which is fine. Sometimes we see a titanium lock with a steel lock bar insert. What's important, it's always nice to see that. I'm always really impressed when they go ahead and do a titanium lock bar and then add the steel lock bar insert. But it's not totally necessary. As long as you have steel on steel contact, that's what I like to see. I would prefer to see this versus a titanium lock that has no insert and it's just a carbonized lock face. The steel on steel should last substantially longer, so as long as it's at least this, we're good. But yeah, it's wanting to, attract to that. So anyways, your weight on this guy, well, that's kilograms. There we go. Your weight on this guy, about what I thought. 4.3 ounces for 3.4 inches of blade is not perfect ratios. Probably gonna be. Oh no, you know what? It's actually balanced pretty well, right there where your index finger is gonna be, so it doesn't feel bad at all. This might be slightly heavy for some people, but I think for most people it'll feel pretty par for the course. Maybe slightly heavier than the average pocket knife. The average pocket knife I think that I review is somewhere in the mid 3 ounces, so maybe slightly heavier than that. No big deal. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'm going to get out my tools. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down there in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. I'm wondering if the pivot is a T. Yeah. So the pivot's actually a T10, which is cool. And then these screws back here are almost certainly a T8, which I also very much like. That's T7. But yeah, so very, very simple, very straightforward. And also, look how we did the pocket clip T8 screw. This can be flipped around, which is something that, when it's possible with the design, is something that pretty much everybody should consider. This is a right-handed locking system. But to accommodate for lefties, he's allowed this clip to be, it's a symmetrical clip that you can just flip over. So lefties will have essentially the same experience outside of disengaging the lock, which I really like. That was a nice way to do that. So as long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. And I want to take a look here and show you guys kind of what I was talking about. Okay, I got it apart. Man, that actually was not super easy. I would recommend picking up like a plastic pry bar, something like this, just so you don't mark up the knife while you don't damage anything while you're taking it apart. But that actually took a bit to get that scale off of there. I'll have to see if I can find an Amazon link for something like this. I think this came with one of the WIA sets that I got in combination with some knife. I can't remember. But yeah, stuff like this is really handy. So I was saying that this is more of a frame lock. I don't know. You can tell me what you think, but I don't see this very often where the entire lock is larger than this piece. Like usually if it's like a steel nested liner lock, it's just this piece and it's like screwed to the frame. This is like a whole piece that's nested inside of the lock side. So is it more of a frame lock, more of a liner lock? I don't know. That's really hard for me to classify. But the important thing is that you see that this is all one piece, right? That's connected. It sort of all connects as you let these pins settle back in and then screw it all back together. Then you can see where the bearings, ride on. It's like a steel piece right here, so it's not riding directly on titanium. But I thought that was pretty cool, an interesting little detail, and certainly not something that's cheap to do, considering you have to do some specific milling to allow, or a lot more milling to allow for this on the inside. You are adding quite a bit of steel, so perhaps it's adding a little bit of extra weight, but as you saw in this section where we weighed it, it's not really that much. And then on the other side, you can see there, it's just milled into the titanium. That's really all there is to see on the inside. I just thought that was kind of interesting, so I'll spare you the time it'll take me to put it back together. Shouldn't be that long, but we'll just use some editing magic. All right, I've got it all back together. Listen, I'll hand it to Riyadh. While it was a little tight getting it apart, right? Just really tight tolerances. Putting it back together was a breeze, and it required essentially zero adjustment, which is something that I've kind of come to expect, especially with the simpler, like there's not very many fasteners. It's just a pivot or maybe two sides of the pivot and then some screws. When it's Riyadh built, you put it back together and it just goes back together and everything is just perfect. And the action, this required essentially no adjustment and it's right back to normal. So that's pretty cool. But I'm glad you guys got to look at the inside of it. Let's go ahead and do the blade stock thickness here. So the blade stock thickness on this guy, probably 125 to 130. No, thinner. 117 thousandths is what I'm getting there on the flat. Okay, let's move on into the meat and potatoes. This is probably the most traditionally shaped knife that Arcane Design has come out with. It still has that distinct Arcane Design aesthetic. I like the cool, these are separate and just purely decorational pieces. As far as I can tell, they have no function. That's always been the way that it's been. The original Arcane Design aesthetic was the black handle with the red, sort of pivot shield. It's hard for me to want to call this a pivot collar, but it had that, and it was like the striking aggro tanto with the the satin blade. I think that original one it was the Necronaut. That was the one. The original one was made by Riyadh. And I remember thinking like, this is one of the most unique and like specific aesthetics that I've ever seen. And since then, he has continued with that aesthetic, changing around profiles and doing different things, but it was always specifically Arcane Design. This is the most traditional knife-shaped knife that they have made, and they still have managed to make it that cool Arcane Design look. One of the things that was kind of a drawback with some designs, like especially with the Necronaut, it was super cool, but it was so pointy. Holding it and cutting with it, it wasn't incredibly comfortable. This is a lot more comfortable, like way more. All of the edges are nicely knocked down. It's maybe still slightly more angular than like knives that are hand melting perfection, but I would call this pretty darn good. I'm honestly locked in and comfortable. The jimping is definitely functional. I really enjoyed carrying and using this. The pocket clip is slightly pinchy depending on which. There's quite a bit of retention. Fortunately, underneath it is rounded and it's on a smooth surface. So, like with jeans, I could kind of just push it in and pull it out with one hand. Athletic pants, athletic shorts is a little bit more of a fight, but not really that big of a deal. I wasn't super upset about it. I was more happy to see that it was accommodating for lefties, so I did appreciate that. I always say sometimes when it's blank, like I would prefer that they did some texturing. I'm not so sure on this one. I kind of like it like this. This is like a little bit more of a reflective tumbled finish. Then we got the black, and then we've got like a tumbled blade here. This one is all black PVD, and I saw some people, talking about they were disappointed that at this price point you weren't getting DLC. And initially I was like, yeah, like, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, it's a small batch. Like, he has to do, this was going to be my initial argument. And I'm just going to let you know, I've flip-flopped this a little bit. Arcane Design, is doing small batches of these. Riot and companies like Riot who do the OEM service thing, they charge a crap load to do this, and it doesn't necessarily leave this massive, contrary to what people think, it doesn't leave a massive amount of room for the designer and the original company to, make an enormous profit. Still making money off of these, right? But they've got it worked out that they're going to make money no matter what, and then they leave it up to Arcane or whoever else to just sell all of them in order to make not necessarily all, but a lot of them, right? And that's true. And we have elements like titanium. We got some nice contouring. We have that cool nested frame liner thing. I don't know what you want to call that. It's cool though. 6162 S90V and S90V on its own. It's a nice blade steel. Yeah, we can get it in Chinese knives that cost about $200. Those knives don't have nearly as much going on here, right? But yeah, I know Riot can do a DLC. The PVD thing, I get, is fine. I mean, that's not a bad coating, guys. Not at all. But we know that Riot can do DLC. We know they can do it really, really well. I have the T1000 here in DLC to prove it. I also know that while DLC does increase the price, there are many Chinese companies out there doing a satin or, polished tumbled DLC, and it's not that much more expensive. We have enough examples now that it's not really a mystery. It's going to add to the cost, but not like, ooh, another $100 or $200. Like, no. Like, there are companies out there trying to do that, but this is not the case, right? So, had they done like a polished DLC on this, oh, especially here with the night vision one, that would have been cool. So, PVD's fine. If you're new, don't read those comments thinking that PVD is bad. People just want DLC because DLC is a superior coating. It is far more scratch resistant, and it's able to be, applied to a satin finish or mirror polished blade, essentially, making it to where you don't have issues with drag. But it's all the way around is considered to be a superior coating. So that would have been cool, absolutely. But anyways, I'm kind of flip-flopping these out so we can show each of them. The flat black does have its charm, and some people just don't like it's not that you have to go reflective if you go DLC either. I mean, DLC can definitely be sort of a matte finish. Ends up being more of a chalky finish, right? But either way, the aesthetic of this is very, very cool. We have a typical, or just like a traditional, it's almost a clip point, right? I mean, it has this distinct drop up here. So I don't know what you'd want to call it. I guess I would call it a clip point. We have a nice swedge, nice flat. Carries quite a bit of material out to the tip, despite it not being a super thick blade to begin with. So overall, it kind of feels robust. I'm not going to say it's incredibly durable. In fact, quite the opposite. S90V at 6162, not the blade that you're going to want to be abusing the tip, right? It'll cut, and it'll cut for a long time, but you don't want to be abusing the tip. Factory edge on this guy feels pretty good. Riot typically does decent factory edge. I don't think it's insanely thin, though. Yeah, it's not really. The factory edge is not insanely thin, but definitely slicing. As you continue to sharpen this, depending on what your skill level and if you're able to sort of alter how thin it is behind the edge, I would call this about medium. I'll let you guys take a look at the plunge grind here. If you're going to be using this and sharpening it a lot, this area might affect you a little bit more. You can see there where the stop pin engages with the blade in the close position, so that's good. You don't want it up here right behind the edge, because then sharpening it multiple times means that you're going to run into trouble there at some point. With the stop pin engaging back here, you should be fine. Literally forever, unless you start sharpening into this area, which is, I don't know how that's going to happen, but yeah, should be okay in terms of the stop pin. But the plunge grind sometimes means something a little bit different to everybody. Everybody's got a little bit different opinion about that, so I'll let you guys take a look at it and you can think what you want to think. But yeah, for me, this, I did notice, this sticks out quite a bit into the cutting edge. So cutting straight down right here where the edge starts, you're going to run into this. So that's kind of the downside of having that place there. Sometimes you can just make the choil area elongated so it ends up being a finger choil. I don't know. A lot of times I find myself cutting at an angle anyway. But sometimes even cutting like this, it's going to bump into material. So it's not, for me, it's not a deal breaker, but for some people it's a lot more annoying. So I would say just be aware of that, you know. But outside of that, really good looking. I don't mind the logo there. I always prefer billboarding as small as possible. And then over here, we actually have... All right, sorry about that. I actually called Arcane. And he has explained this to me before. It's not a collab. He has a different logo for each of his designs, right? A different sort of character or, you know. So this is just the logo for the Automaton. So not a collab. I was wondering, because it didn't say anything on the website about a collab. I was like, I don't think I missed anything. But if you were wondering, that's what that logo is. So... thank you so much for explaining that to me. But anyways, it's simple, it's subtle, it's not too aggressive, it's not out here and big and crazy, right? Looks good. I don't have a problem with that at all. As I said, Riat typical fit and finish. Everything is perfect. There's no goofy or wonky lines anywhere. That's what you should expect. Also, I didn't really point this out, but I really like the access to the lock bar, and I also like how it nests, but you can still see it lipped over the edge right there. There's something very satisfying about that. Access to it is nice and easy. It's very organic, second nature. Doesn't feel like you're having to fight anything or get into a weird pinchy area. It's just good. I really enjoy that. So nice work on that. Sometimes that area is a real problem area. Some companies have a harder time figuring that out, so I appreciate that is that way. Very, very simple backspacer, nothing crazy going on here. I do like on the colored ones that they go ahead and anodize it, which is really cool. All the pieces that are anodized, you know, those are all titanium, so that's nice. It does look good. I don't know that it needs to have any texturing or anything going on, because it's really kind of just it's an opportunity for color pop. But on, you know, the standard one like this, if like you don't like any anodizing, then it's just black, and it also looks good. Pocket clip, I think, is just fine. It's not a spectacular clip, but it is deep carry, slightly pinchy, but it'll do the job, and I'm not having to fight it too much personally. So again, not really that much of an issue. As I mentioned before, the fact that he was thinking of lefties when he designed this clip, that's really what's the most important to me. We have a stop pin located in its traditional spot, and it is the open position pin, which you can see right here. This is where it's engaging in the open position. No shouldering, no big deal. It's also the closed position pin, and we can see again right here somewhere. It's basically, yeah, that line right there is where it's engaging in the closed position. There is no blade play up, down, left, or right. Very, very solid. No lock stick, no pivot lash. Very smooth and consistent in here. And kind of a medium detent, one that would accommodate for the thumb studs being the only thing that you would utilize to deploy it. So I'm really happy to say that, you know, the base, between this version and this exclusive edition on Blade Bench, there's only $5 in difference. The base price of this knife is $345. And then there are more expensive versions of this on his website. You can go all the way up to Damasteel and pay a crazy amount if you want to. This Blade Binge exclusive edition is $350, might be $355, might be a $10 difference, right? So is that a fair price? Well, for a lot of people, that's going to be too much money. And for some people, it's not going to be as much, right? If you are comparing it to a company like Artisan Cutlery, I think a lot of people will say, I can get titanium and S90V from Artisan Cutlery for about $200. You can, but let's dissect that. Is that the same thing? Would we put Artisan Cutlery, as much as I like Artisan Cutlery, are we putting those designs, their $200 titanium and S90V designs, on the same level, the same plane, the same caliber as Riat? I would say no, right off the bat. That's not a bad way to spend $200, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. Riat is top tier for Chinese manufacturing. On top of that, these are contoured, so they have those added costs. It's also a more expensive way to do this hybrid frame liner lock thing, which is pretty cool, but not everybody cares about it. S90V, definitely an expensive blade material, but not anything insanely exotic. And then heat treating it, getting it up there to 61, 62 might add a little bit of cost. All the other parts are titanium, right? And then again, whether or not you care or are aware of it, we do have to factor in the part where his margin, like his ability to like make money on these, is so much more narrow than people realize. That is a very real thing. He cannot just say, okay, these are $250. He doesn't have that kind of room, right? So you do have competition, a company like Artisan Cutlery who can pump out, a new simple design in titanium and S90V every week. And because they're doing it in-house, then they have that much more room, right? So is $345 a fair price for this? It's still high. Something like this, I think with it not being, if this was optional real DLC and they charged $350 for this, I think I would have been more comfortable with that. And then if a base version was right around $300. So it's high, but I don't find it incredibly offensive. I always say, if we're looking at a knife that's manufactured in China and you're going to get to the 300 or more mark, you better be doing something a little bit special, a little bit extra. And I think there are some extra elements here, right? It's not your, S35VN or 20CV and titanium, whatever. I think there's a little bit extra effort here. He did tell me that he has some DLC, some satin DLC things in the works. And I assume that means with Riyadh. But he does have some models that are, coming out in the future that will utilize a satin DLC, which is really cool. He did confirm with me that Riyadh does charge quite a bit to do that. So that's going to make things even more expensive. But yeah, so I think a little high for sure, but we're not talking like, oh my gosh, they're overcharging by $150. No. I think you have to ignore a lot of the elements that this knife brings to the table in order to say that. I think that there are elements here that many people simply don't care about, and so the value is not going to be there for them. But there are a lot of elements on these knives that are going to increase the cost. So these knives are, number one, made for people who like the Arcane design aesthetic, and number two, people who like it but still want to use and EDC these knives and want to be comfortable. Like, this is a more lightweight, compact, friendly Arcane design. I think it's probably one of the most EDC friendly. I personally, I enjoyed this one the most out of any of the designs. As far just like a general carry and use knife. I didn't do anything crazy extensive with these, but just carrying this and using it, getting out, flicking, just enjoying it. Like I enjoyed it as a cool, artistic pocket knife, and at the same time as a tool. I thought it was really good. So I'm going to recommend this specifically to people who are looking for this type of EDC object with the Arcane design aesthetic, but it's clearly not going to be for everybody. So you'll have to kind of, as is usually the case, you'll have to make that decision for yourself. Cool stuff from Arcane design, though. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.